Uh, can we start? Please. O Benjamin também não está chegando. Vê se outra pessoa fica no lugar do Benjamin. Não viu o Benjamin? Bota. O Paulo Furquim também não viu o Sandro. Eu acho que todo mundo que está aí pode sentar na mesa. Aí depois a gente coloca. O Benjamin não está. Pode tirar. Pode tirar o Benjamin. Acho que eu hoje preciso de ajuda aqui, tá? Bevilacqua, tem uma opção de pessoas.
Tira, então.
Uh, can we start now? Please, I think we have room at the table. Please join us, okay? Because some people are coming in this afternoon. So please be invited to join us in the places that people didn't show, okay? I have the greatest pleasure to give the floor to Professor Jorge Guimarães, who is the head of CAPES. As I told you yesterday, CAPES is responsible for the evaluation of all graduate programs and is doing marvelous work in Brazil to really make a revolution in the graduate schools in our country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna. It's a great pleasure for me to be here this morning. We have some expectation that this meeting will provide us many important subjects to continue our work at CAPES. For those who does not have as much knowledge about CAPES, CAPES is a foundation linked to the Ministry of Education, created in 1951, few years after the Second World War. At that time, it was our main inspirator, Professor Anísio Teixeira, thought that as a result of the war, Brazil would be better prepared for the next times and for future development. And then he created CAPES, and at the same time, another inspirator, Almirante Álvaro Alberto, creates our National Research Council, CNPq. So we are both now 6 decades old. For us, this is a long time, because for more than 3 centuries, nothing happened in Brazil except to be explored by our richness, and to realize how important is this. Our oldest university, University of São Paulo, was created only in 1934. In 1951, when CAPES was created, there was only 5 universities in Brazil. So we are way behind. We are also we are a young capitalist country because of this. So relationship between research and industry is quite poor, because this requires, as you know, a culture that takes time to be offered for all those who are involved in this subject. Today, CAPES is an agency that is supporting, since the beginning, the graduating programs in Brazil and abroad. This has been our main mission up to 2008, when CAPES was invited also to be responsible for the preparation of new professor for basic school, which is a very hard and very difficult challenge for us. I believe this is the greatest challenge you have, is the qualification of basic education. So since 2008, you have been work on that. And maybe one reason why CAPES has been so well recognized during these 6 decades, it was the fact that half of this time, only 4 presidents were running these agencies, which is very uncommon in Brazil. I'm now at CAPES for 9 years, and our main inspiration was 12 years as a president of CAPS. And this means that we could develop long-term policies for supporting our mission. In 2006, we created this project called the Advanced School Studies, which has been supporting many events like this, and many of them we bought many Nobel Prizes, and the people that decide accept to come for being discussed the subjects that is important for us and for the rest of the world. So this is one of these meetings, and besides this, we support 4 meetings, scientific meetings per day. 1,500 meetings last year that has been supported by CAPS for discussing science and expose our students to our visitors, to the scientists that comes to Brazil. So that's saying that, I say that we have a great expectation. Have heard that the meeting is going very well. This and Ana Castro is doing a very nice job to go on with this subject, and we're gonna do many more together, isn't it? So as you know, in this page of this introductory document she sent to us, the proposal here is very clear. What we expect, what she expects, and what we can expect from our view. So as we know, some people are not here, isn't it? I have Professor Jan Kregel from Levy Institute, Jorge Avila, my colleague from the NPI here. He's just coming, and Manuel Montes from Geneva, and Professor Prahabta Patinaik from Brazil. Thank you very much for knowing you personally. Okay, so I guess you can start, isn't it? So, Professor, would you please give us your speech? I guess you have about 15 to 20 minutes to left time for discussion, and after everyone has been spoken, then we have a coffee break, and then we continue for the discussion. Please.
Okay. I certainly will not take the 15 minutes, but I will try to raise some points I think that are useful. There are a number of ways to do this, and I think what I'm going to try to do is to build on the discussion that we had yesterday in terms of the role of the state, innovation, and other things. So let's see if I can succeed in doing this. Now, first of all, we've had a lot of discussion about just exactly what we should be talking about, what we could say agenda points, and at one stage we had a very nice list of agenda points that had 4, and then I think it was Benjamin who came in and said, well, no, you've forgotten one, so now we have 5, and then we had 6, and then we got to 7, and I think in much of the discussion there is a great danger that we spend a little bit too much time trying to identify just exactly the specific areas or the specific elements that that the school should be talking about, when probably there's another higher level problem to be resolved. And basically what ends up on the agenda is going to be determined by what I think I mentioned at the beginning yesterday, what kind of value added, what we can offer that cannot be provided by other types of educational institutions. Now, it's from this point of view that I'm going to sort of, I think, piggyback on some of the things that Mariana was saying yesterday. Basically, what we can provide is, I would argue, an alternative approach, an alternative reading on basic policy issues from the point of view of first developing economies, but secondly, from the point of view of middle-income developing economies, and lastly, from the point of view of, in particular, Brazil. Leonardo is not here today, but his famous catchword is always, we want to look at Brazil as a global player. That is what we should be doing, is trying to, in a sense, redimension the way Brazilian policymakers, in particular diplomats and those people who are in areas of decision-making, view their particular role, how they view Brazil's role in the global economy, and how they can make a contribution not only domestically but also globally. So if we look at that from this particular point of view, Georgia eventually will be here. He will talk about property rights, but the discussion and the analysis of property rights at the global level is very different whether you do it from the point of view of Brazil, or whether you do it from the point of view of China, or whether you do it from the point of view of Pfizer. Oh, sorry, I mean the United States. So these are the sorts, I would say, these are the sorts of value added that we can provide, of saying there is not one single way of approaching the problem of international patents or international property rights. That is, there are various alternative ways depending on the particular conditions in particular countries, and we want to highlight, or we should be able to highlight this. Now, as I said, one of the ways of looking at this is say, what can we offer? We can offer this alternative focus. Basically, this alternative focus has been, if we say has been in a sense, has been provided, the innovation has been provided by state or government investment. The Brazilian university system, funded by the government, has provided what is probably unique globally as an alternative approach to economic and political issues. That is, it's impossible to find a combination of universities that teach alternative points of view in any other country around the globe. In particular, if we take the case of my home country, the United States, it is very difficult to find more than 2 or 3 institutions that provide any sort of viable and well-grounded and structured alternative approach. So this is, again, you can look at it from this point of view. The state has provided the funding, has provided the innovation, it has produced the approach. So the question is, can we in fact exploit that particular advantage? And if we take the role, one of the roles of venture capitalists, we can say Anna Celia was identified as an entrepreneur the other day. The question is it possible to take that basis, to take those innovations that exist in Brazil and actually turn them into a viable institution which can create, individuals can go out and use that innovation. So it's, it's one thing to do it in the universities, it's one thing for the university system to create very good political scientists, very good anthropologists, very good economists with alternative points of view, but unless it can be translated into policy proposals, instead, if it cannot be translated into proposals at the global level in order to change the kinds of what tends to be center-dominated, in the sense of center-periphery, center-dominated discussions, then in fact we really have not satisfied our goals. I would argue that this is basically what we are looking at, and from that point of view the agenda sort of falls into place. We really don't have to spend a lot of time discussing whether or not we should have environment or shouldn't have environment. Clearly we should, but the point is not whether we discuss environment, the point is how we do it and whether we are able to provide an alternative approach to the one that is currently existing. So this is sort of the first point, where is our value added, and the value added has to be in terms of exploiting what is this, I think, very large stock of accumulated expertise and accumulated knowledge in terms of alternative approaches from the point of view of a middle-income developing country. Now, whether this is focused solely at Brazil, or whether this can be extended to a more general level, IBRAC, I presume, attempts to extend this to the relationships between Brazil and China, and it's certainly plausible or possible that the approach could be extended more or less to the level of Mercosur in order to try and use the Brazilian expertise in order to create a more regionally integrated approach to these sorts of issues. So this brings us to the second point, and the question is, to whom? Now, who is going to be the recipient of, or who is going to be the client? You have the supply side. We also need the demand side. And this is going to be, again, a very crucial question. That is, you can create the best product in the world, but if nobody buys it or if nobody wants to use it, then you're still at exactly the same level. What you have is the expertise sitting in the universities. You have the expertise sitting there, but it doesn't effectively get distributed. Now, at the beginning of the discussions that we had concerning the formulation of this initiative, the basic idea was that it would be directed primarily at policymakers, diplomats, and people in decision-making positions. Now, it's not clear that this should be the limitation. That is, as I've already mentioned, one of the advantages of doing this in Brazil is that it does have this very large stock of accumulated knowledge in universities that doesn't exist in other countries. So there is the possibility that the program could be extended not only to the level of Latin America, but presumably also to developed countries. That is, if there is a lack of this sort of initiative, that lack is clearly in the developed countries more so than in developing countries. But this is the second issue that we have to face. Just exactly who is going to be on the receiving end, and once we have identified that, just exactly how we make sure that there is implementation. Okay, now this is an issue that comes up in terms of looking at any sort of alternative program, and a number of programs that I've been associated with have been very successful in terms of, I guess, what you call after-sale maintenance of the product. That is, in creating a network, and we start out with this idea. Now, on the production side, we have a network, but in terms of the client side, it's also important to develop a network. That is, the people who come into the program have to be absorbed into the network. And the real strength of the program comes not only in terms of what you provide to the participants in the program, but the fact that they then become an integral part of the network and become identified with the network. So you can call this after-sale maintenance or whatever you want to call it, but the idea is that the people who come out of the program, who have existed in the program, should also be forming a network in which they can be exchanging their experiences, in which they can be building and providing inputs into the program itself. So whether you want to call this Spider 2 or Spider Squared or Arachnid, something or other, it's very important that when you look at if you look at the demand side also has its network. So you want a network on both sides to make sure that it becomes permanent. Because if it doesn't, if you don't build up this group and identification with the group of the people who have been in the program, then the program is likely to fail. That is, this is probably as important as setting up the network. And finally, then, just going back to the idea of what we are in fact providing. I've already mentioned that the innovation that has been done by the sense of the innovation done by the Brazilian government in the universities. Clearly, we also want to make sure that the focus is on policy formation. Okay, that is, we're not constructing abstract models, we're not constructing abstract sandcastles. We want to make very sure that what we're doing are things that not only are relevant, but are applicable. And in this sense, Renato is, where is Renato? Renato is not here. But the point that he made before about attempting to have broader integration between the political science, the historical, and the other various aspects of the program are extremely important, because this is what will determine the possibility of implementation, the applicability of the kinds of proposals that are going to come out of the school. So I think we have to be very, very attentive, not, well, I don't know, we always talk about center-periphery dominance. Economists have taken on this model and decided that they are the center, and all of the other social sciences are the periphery. And I think this is something that we do clearly want to avoid if the program is going to be successful in terms of final implementation and impact. So the second part, I would say, the success of the program. The first part is creating this after-service network, and Georgie, hi. And secondly, making sure that in fact the policies are in fact part of the overall discussion, and that they are implementable and in fact can provide the changes in development that that we would like to see. And I think that's about all I've got to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Young. Yeah, that's escaped you for a while. Yep, Dan. Professor Manuel Montes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to congratulate Brazil, and I want to congratulate CAPS, and I want to congratulate Anacelia for this initiative. Actually, this morning I ran into Ford Foundation people at breakfast time, because it turns out they have a group of people in from the foundation world who are having a meeting at the same time, and they're staying in the hotel. But it's about how foundations can share data with each other, right? But in effect, this is an initiative that I had been involved in, sort of when I was at the Ford Foundation, and I guess this is the reason why I was asked to say something at this point. But my discussion is three main things, yeah? Three main areas of discussion. One is what is the South Center, because I think it's, I want to discuss a little bit about synergies and connections. Second two is, given the title of the topic, what is policy impact, right? Not an easy topic, right? And the third is, I want to talk a little bit about the ingredients of a school with a policy impact. I think yesterday we already talked a lot about this this element, and I didn't intervene, but I was very sympathetic to a lot of what was said yesterday afternoon in the last session. Yeah? So what is the South Center? The South Center is an intergovernmental body. It's owned by 51 countries. It is the functional equivalent to OECD, except that our budget is very, very small. I mean, we keep on having to raise money. Our total budget is probably on the spending side around 3 million a year. And we have about, I was counting, there was 10 staff. I think Robert was asking me this morning, 10 or 11 professional staff, and then we have 2 translators, and that's what, we work on 4 issues. We work on intellectual property and innovation. We work on climate change. We work on trade, and we work on finance and development. This crisis. We're based in Geneva because in the diplomatic world, this is where all the diplomats who are specialized in these economic policy issues are based. Yeah? What we do research. We help developing countries in international negotiations. We provide a platform for South-South cooperation and coordination, and we also do capacity building. In our negotiations work and in international cooperation work, the developing countries are in command. We don't want our fingerprints. We follow instructions. We operate on the basis of request. But on research and a little bit in the capacity building, the Secretariat, I'm talking about the Secretariat, right? They're the owners of developing countries. The Secretariat has some leeway to be independent, right? So it is there where we could probably have some synergy with yours. Right? Our reach is middle-income countries, LDCs, SIDS, small island development states. We have connections in Asia, Latin America, Africa. We can contribute to this network, as I said, in the research and in capacity building, right? And we have good connections with, because through our negotiations work, we have a good connections with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs too, right? Though one of our frustrations is that our expertise in economics, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs people, require a lot of assistance, right? Or they, they come to us and they ask us to explain what the issues are, right? We also are, one of the weaknesses of one of the limitations of our work is that the developing countries are actually more diverse than the rich countries. They have an easier, first of all, they have an easier time coordinating because they have a lot more money. But secondly, their actual situations are very, very much different from each other. They have a very big, wide range of income. They have, a lot of them are very dependent on just a few exports, right? And they're in different regions and in different historical inherited. One thing that I wanted to say a little bit here is that a lot of the research is not immediately, a lot of the academic research that we normally undertake is not quickly usable, I mean, not usable by the way they are in negotiations and in actual work with respect to what the developing countries need. I'll give you one example now. It's there's a big debate now about GATS. GATS is the General Agreement on Trade and Services, and the re-regulation of the financial sector, right? In effect, what GATS, see, there's in GATS, whoever signs on to GATS has obligations, right? About because one of the most important trade in services is the financial sector, right? The financial sector is in GATS, and there are countries that have taken on obligations, but there is a prudential escape clause in GATS. Now, from a purely academic point of view, developing countries should not undertake obligations in GATS so that they can re-regulate their financial sector. But even if you're not a developing country, if you were the United States and you were going to implement a lot of the features of the Dodd-Frank bill, you would actually violate, or it's not clear, there are no cases yet, you would actually violate GATS. But the subtlety of this issue is that we are quite careful about saying that we should reopen GATS, because normally when you start reopening some area of negotiations, the developing countries are going to be forced to take on additional obligations, right? And that it might be better at this point in time, right? Everything is conjunctural. At this point in time, to stay with the escape clauses that exist in GATS. There is a prudential escape clause, and not to have that defined, right? So this is not to define it at all, right? To let countries go ahead and re-regulate and see what happens with the dispute mechanism. I was also in there's also this environment and trade issues. I mean, escape clauses on environment and trade. So this is just an example. I'm not going to go through that just so that I don't take too much time. So let me now go into the second topic, which is a question of policy impact, right? Well, I was just with Ha-Jun Chang about 3 months ago, and one of the things he and I agreed on is that academia is the most slowly adapting sector in any society, right? His formulation was that ideas change one funeral at a time, right? Because what happens is that you have people who are sitting in this, in these departments, and they so in effect, one of the things that I think one of the ideas that we could pick up from Jan's point is that there are a few places in the world where there is a wealth, some kind of a stock of knowledge, some kind of an opening where if you want to change how the way policy is made, you would like to draw on this stock of knowledge, right? Latin America and especially Brazil is actually quite some of this supply. There is some. India is actually quite a good place where there still exists. There's some in Turkey, but very few other countries actually have this kind of possibility. What actually happens is that heterodox economies, they come and they most of the time in many developing countries they're alone in their department, right? Because for a very long time the theory that has been taught has been the same. So having been at the Ford Foundation, one always gets into discussion about policy impact, and the question is always posed as what is your theory of social change, right? So Well, social changes can be abrupt, they're discontinuous, but actually they're very unpredictable, right? And in many cases, a lot of changes have happened when some individuals have gotten into some policy positions, right? And they have been able to, and they have not been able to change a lot, but they have to change enough, or maybe to change the direction. But hopefully, when they leave, the direction continues to be the same. Often, the way I see it is that it's the avoidance of a policy disaster is the most important policy impact. You know, we are living in a world in which there's a very dominant way of thinking about how development happens. If you stop something from happening, right? For example, the prevention of new international obligations on the part of developing countries is one example, right? Or a reinterpretation of policies favored by the North, but reinterpretation in the way that is still useful to developed countries, right? For me, given my this kind of understanding about social how things change, right? I think the best approach would be, the most realistic approach is to build alternative capacity and to maintain and to expand it. So in effect, this agenda, right, this way is well within that kind of you know, either an excuse or a way to think about how things actually change. Things will change, right? For example, if this crisis takes, well, this crisis will take at least 5 years, right? But if there's a real downturn, right? For example, if the euro collapses and all the stuff, the rate of change will go faster. But it's not something that you can plan on, right? It's not. But so basically, building capacity, building a broader group of people who can understand reality in a different way, is actually probably the most realistic approach that I can suggest, right? So the last part of my discussion is really what about elements towards policy impact. And as I said earlier, a lot of this we've heard yesterday about how you build a school. And I know Anastasia has been working with this for a long time. And let me talk about 3 things with respect to what, you know, what would be the elements towards a capacity building approach that would build the alternative capacity. One is the content. It's important to discuss, and we've discussed a little bit about that. Secondly is audience and constituency. Jan talked a little about those. And the third one is network and material sustainability. I guess this is the same 3 things that Jan actually talked about. Let me just share my own ideas about this. Well, on content, using the word advanced means it has to be critical of prevailing frameworks. But actually, graduate schools are supposed to be like that, right? But they're not enough as being critical of the existing frameworks. For me, the content should put an emphasis on the problems that developing countries face, right? Another bullet point I have here is. And this is part of the debate. I had this in my bullet point even before the debate yesterday, right? And I've been telling people informally. We should really go into the macroeconomic foundations of microeconomics, right? There's the problem with just talking about microeconomics and building it up to the macro is that you then, you open yourself to the danger that, well, then the state is not needed, right? Or firms are not needed. You don't need you don't need company. You don't need money, right? And some of these are the beginning of unrealism and the beginning of all kinds of policy suggestions that, well, if you want to do some policy, you have to first identify what the market failure is, right? So for me, this is and this is actually quite not yet worked out, not well worked out kind of an idea, right? And the next bullet point is about for me an important idea is the role of demand and the structure of demand in international economics, in international economic relations, in trade, and in financial flows, right? What are the issues of current interest to the South Center, right? One is actually that. What will be the source or the sources of international demand in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years? The second one is the middle income trap, which is also a big issue in Asia. The third one is income distribution, the structure of domestic demand and the future of export-dependent growth. And the fourth I think, immediate topic that we're interested in is, can South-South relations be different from North-South relations? You know, China is a big buyer of commodities now, right? In Africa, right? So what do the Africans do about China buying all of their commodities? This used to be the classic North-South relationship. Will there be another way for China to relate to the other countries in the coming years? Yeah. So that's the first part, content. The second part is about audience and constituencies. Again, I agree with Jan, politicians, policymakers, negotiators, civil society and international agencies, academics, I say here both young and old. I can give some examples of work I have been involved in before. The business community, particularly in developing countries. One of the formulations that I like to think is that a developmental state, if you believe in a developmental state, consults the domestic private sector before it makes any international commitments, right? So, and I don't know how many countries actually are able to do this, right? It's the developed countries that do this all the time. Their negotiators are dominated by private interests. And then we have to be very conscious of the subgroupings of countries. My experience here, and some people know about this, that there were two big schools that workshop schools that we helped to start up when I was at the Ford Foundation for 5.5 years. One was called CAPORD, the Cambridge Advanced Program on Rethinking Development Economics. Now the reason I'm laughing is because Hajun Chang actually was thinking of another acronym for it. He was thinking advanced school, which is the same advanced school, for advanced school working on alternative development economics. And it's us Wade, right? So he was sort of pointing to Robert Wade over here. The other big network that we helped to start off, and there are smaller ones because Jan and Anasaya were involved in the small one that was just based in Siatini, which was an African network, right? But the other one was called the Gender and Macroeconomics International Working Group, right? So this is a gender group that wanted to put macroeconomics in. And this group actually, in terms of analytical capability, is a very important inputter to a lot of what is being done on gender, which used to concentrate a lot on violence against women, right? Just to give an example of one of the propositions. If you want to be an export-oriented developing country, you have to have a competitive exchange rate, right? Well, one of the ways you can have a competitive exchange rate without a nominal devaluation is to have women produce the product and pay them less, right? This is the pay them less than what you would pay, right? So these are the kind of research that there's a research from Stephanie Seguino and Karen Groen, the kind of thing that you would do if you would do gender and macroeconomics school. The last part I want to talk about is the network part, which Jan also actually emphasized. Yesterday, Paulo Forkim said something that I thought was very, very important, right? That the emotional content of the network is very, very important. This is when you build a network, and there was also a discussion yesterday that a biochemistry network. They had lunch together and they were in an isolated place, that kind of thing. So this is in building a network, you need not only a common some basic, and there are many contradictions within the left, right? I mean, a lot of you come from the left tradition, and you know how difficult building a network among the left is, right? But there is but the emotional connection is very, very important, and it's something that I would urge to think about in a very big way. When I was at the Ford Foundation, there were other networks too that they had their revolutionary content, the way the Tea Party in the U.S. has a revolutionary content, right? But they were on the other side, the ERC, for example. There's a Polish, Sebastian should be here. Right? ERC is a network of people who wanted to bring in free market ideas into the former Soviet Union. Before that, actually, the Ford Foundation funded a lot of a big network on general equilibrium modeling. Right? General equilibrium modeling was originally invented for fiscal policy analysis, right? But its biggest use in the end was for trade policy analysis, which all kinds of funny results, right? But these are people who are very revolutionary because they thought of themselves that they were going to remove protectionism finally and totally from the developing world. But so there is all I'm saying is that there is an emotional content that should be part of the network building, right? So and the women, the gender and macroeconomics group had a very good way of doing this. First, they had the 2-week or the 3-week workshop, and right after that, they had a 2 or 3 day international conference. So that way, the former students could come back and help teach in the 2-week conference, and then they could also then have a conference among, sort of an academic conference among themselves, including the students that including the students that had come in to join that conference. So, joint research activities are important. This is always a problem of budgeting what money you have, right? It's very costly to run a workshop school. So one of the issues that's always an issue here is the role of external funding. Many of these things die down after the external funding ends. So I would presume that one advantage of doing it in Brazil is that there's an academic foundation, right? In the case of Hajun, he was doing it on the Hajun Chang. This is Kapord, right? He was doing it on the side, sitting on another department called the Development Studies Center or something like that, right? And the funding was going through there, but it wasn't really in the economics section. So it's very important for you for something like this to have some solid base. And I think, as Jan emphasized, there is a big possibility of that in Brazil, right? So that's really all I want to say. For me, the existence of a core, it's very important, right? We economists like to prove the existence of a core, but actually we have very little idea of how to build it, right? So, but I think with Ana Celia here and the support of CAPS, it would be quite possible to do so.
Thank you, Professor Motz. Your turn. Okay. That's all.
Hello, good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. It was a long time since the last time I had the opportunity to participate in a seminar organized by my very good friend, Ana Celia. So I'm very happy to be here. And Anna asked me to talk about the role INPI has been developing and taking in discussing IP and innovation in the Brazilian scenario, and how the academy which we have built inside the INPI. INPI, for those who don't know, is the Brazilian Patent and Trademark Office. And the role our academy can have in this context of building a school for advanced studies which can deliver policy advice. First, I think that I should make a brief note on the nature of INPI. INPI is not only an operational patent and trademark office. We have been, many years ago, when we decided that INPI needed to be restructured, we easily came to the conclusion that in Brazil we would need a little bit more than only building an efficient patent and trademark office. Brazilians did not know how to use that structure, and INPI was seen basically as a government structure intended to help international business to protect their rights in Brazil. So it was just natural that INPI developed a parallel area which might help the Brazilians understand the IP system and take the best possible value from it. So INPI developed in two directions. in one direction, the very traditional IP office structure, which receives applications for patents, trademarks, industrial designs, computer software, and other forms of IP, analyzes and grants rights. And another side, which is intended to help local companies, small and medium enterprises, research institutions to better understand the system, build their own IP portfolios, and do the best possible deals with these portfolios. This started being a very small unit designed to offer training programs, which in the beginning were very small. And then with the help of Ana Célia, we could build a first more integrated program in a postgraduate level. It was at that time still a lato sensu program, and we built it inside the institute together with the Federal University of Rio. And from this experience, we could build formally what we today call the IP and Innovation Academy inside the INPI as a formal organizational unit, which is intended to provide training programs, as it beginning did, but also higher-level education programs. Today, we offer not only the lato sensu program, but also a master's degree program. And CAPES has just approved our proposal to begin this year a doctoral program in IP and innovation. So this has been a trajectory of about 6 years, during which the academy could put together, I think, that very relevant knowledge, could have an experience of debating how better could the Brazilian economics players engage into the so-called knowledge economy and take the best possible value from it. In the beginning, we had a very policy-oriented approach. When we started doing the master's program, and the research lines were essentially centered in policy aspects of the IP system. And we soon realized that it would also be not the best thing that we only concentrated in that. A more pragmatic approach has come a little bit later. And today, I would say that we have also 2 lines in the academy as the main conductors of our activities. One part of it is still the policy-oriented, and possibly the most complex one is the policy-related research, which aims at discussing the IP legislation, IP economics, both in the national and international levels. And there's another line of research and discussion, which is a more pragmatic one, intended to help build a Brazilian knowledge on how to engage and participate in the most sophisticated markets related to knowledge, intangible assets, and so on, and how to use the IP system in order to build capacity to better engage in the so-called open innovation, collaborative research arrangements. I think this has been done quite well. We have a compromise with CAPES, and I think that this is very important, that we should link these initiatives in our academy to the more general scenario of the technology-oriented post-graduation in Brazil. It was part of the diagnostics, which probably was the reason CAPES approved our programs, was the idea that, the diagnostics that in Brazilian higher education system, there were no programs, and not even disciplines, which might help professionals understand the way these innovation arrangements operated, how markets were built in order to make collaborative research possible and how to interact with these markets. So we try to develop this knowledge inside our institution and bring professors from the different universities in Brazil to work with us, to do research with us. And now we are trying to disseminate courses, disciplines, programs among the best universities in Brazil in the areas of engineering, biology, health, life sciences, and in any field in which understanding the way the IP system operates and learning how to build IP portfolios and do businesses with these portfolios might make a difference. Given this very general scenario of what is our INPI and our IP Academy, there's one other issue which might be interesting to comment, that this was not an isolated initiative in Brazil. We saw this was happening in other countries too. WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organization itself, built an academy a few years before our did ours, and it was an example which was followed by several countries. In truth, when we created our academy, WIPO was supportive, and we proposed that we could make a meeting congregating all the patent offices which were developing IP academies. And we built sort of a network of these academies. And we also do some programs together with these other academies which are spread worldwide. So the question I think I would like to address now is how we can put our academy and how we can put this network of academies developing some relevant role in the context of building a school which might deliver policy orientation, policy advice. I think that especially for policymakers in the developing world, I think that this is possibly the main focus, though I think that there's some, possibly some advice which could also be intended to the international system and its governance bodies, such as WIPO and WTO. Yes, the development agenda of WIPO played a role. I think this was something which was interesting. That I have a very particular way of telling the story of the development agenda, but this would take another another 15 minutes. It's a little bit too long. But I think that we have learned a lot during the development agenda discussions, and this has made us develop these two approaches. The policy discussion approach, which might be maybe summarized in saying, how should the future IP system look like? So this is one question to be addressed. The other one is, how do we operate in the current IP system? So the IP system is something which is evolving. The knowledge economy is very dynamic. I think that the institutions which conform these new markets are changing very fast, and so do the policies which organize these markets. So I think we need all the time to be thinking on how it will be in the future, and also how to better operate in the present, given the current conditions. And this is what we have been doing, and I think that we can possibly do things together, both in terms of education and also in terms of research, together with the new school which is being proposed. Our academy today is organized, it's become very big, in truth, and it's organized in 5 subunits, one which is dedicated to training, another one which is dedicated to high-level education, another one which coordinates research programs, especially policy-oriented research programs, and another one which plays the role of understanding the different technology sectors, that deals with research on trends, on what's going on how to better how innovation is being organized in each of these new markets and so on. And finally, there is one unit which is dedicated to technical assistance, which may provide direct advice to small and medium enterprises, and also to local governments and policymakers in general. So I think that I think that the new school will also have possibly to have not only education and research activities, but I think that some technical assistance should also be part of it, and we can possibly work together in these three dimensions. We have today a team of professors which is quite well prepared to these more general discussions. We have been collaborating in several initiatives, and I think that it will be just natural that we collaborate again here. We have a very big staff of very well-educated examiners, which, if they only examined patents for their entire life, they would be crazy. So sometimes they need to engage in other activities, and they do like to engage in education and research. So we try to organize opportunities for these people to do different activities, and so and this is a very big staff. Today, about 350 people. If everything goes okay, in 1 year it will be double this size. So it's a lot of people. It's really an army of PhDs which can help in many senses discussions regarding these several subjects.
And how big is the academy?
The academy, look, the permanent staff of the academy is about 40 people. But of these 40 people, 20 professors, full-time professors, something like that. We don't intend to make this number increase too much, because we want to use, and yes, and yes, there's the problem with the way, because in truth, our academy can rely on all these 350 people. But if we put them formally into the captives, will make sort of they take the scientific production in the numerator and the number of researchers in the denominator, and then our productivity would be considered awful. So
That's the reason we have maximum 20 permanent professors.
So,
More than that, this would be really a disaster.
so we are coming to this figure. In truth, we are going to reach 20 with this new. There is now we are hiring today. We are in the process of hiring new professors, and we should hire this year 8, I think.
Yes,
I think we are hiring 8 people, which professors.
Yes.
It's just very senior professors. This is we have we are trying to attract people like Anastasia, for instance, who have had a long career in the academy and now are looking for different opportunities. And we have been quite successful too now. We hope we are successful again. So we can discuss. Okay, George, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. He's afraid of the next step. You know, we authorize that there is, although the university they have autonomy and institutes, they can have graduate programs in Brazil, not only universities, but they are reevaluated every 3rd year. So if it doesn't work, they close. And this for sure have been done for 40 years to evaluate that. So though they have autonomy to start without, we cannot do that without passing through CAPS, and which is analyzed by the peer review system, as you know, and then they will be reevaluated every 3rd year, all of them. So they give grades 1, 2 to 7, and 6 and 7 must have an international standard, and 1 and 2 close. So could be the best university. There's no doubt. They cannot continue. So that's what he's concerning about. Okay, Professor, how spell your name correctly for me? That Patnaik. Please, Professor Patnaik.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm really grateful for the invitation. Yesterday and today, we have had a lot of suggestions and discussion about what the school should look like, what it should be doing. I don't want to, I broadly agree with what has been discussed, and I don't want to add anything to that. What I want to suggest is something a little different, namely about the research agenda that the school could possibly take on. And here, there are two factors which underlie what I'm saying. The first, which Jan said, is that Brazil is in a unique and advantageous position where it can actually emerge as a leader in the context of the third world as a whole, because you have this unique capacity of a number of universities which are not necessarily hegemonized by mainstream thinking emerging from the United States, and that's a great advantage. It is true that countries like Brazil or India or China, there would be an effort to co-opt them, to put them on the high table as G20. But on the other hand, I think these countries also should resist the temptation to separate themselves from the rest of the third world. The second factor, which I think underlies my comments, is that I believe that this crisis which we are in, this world economic crisis, is going to last for quite some time, because I believe underlying it is a very important structural change which has taken place in capitalism. If you look at the process of globalization, for the first time, what globalization has done is that the third world labor reserves, which used to keep down the wage rates in the third world countries, are now also keeping down the wage rates in the first world countries. In other words, the vector of wage rates taking the world economy as a whole is not rising. In fact, in the United States, I'm told that the real wage rate in the last 3 decades has declined a little. Now, while the vector of real wages is not rising, of course, labor productivity everywhere is rising quite rapidly. As a result, you have a tendency towards global underconsumption, which may be camouflaged for a while because of the fact of credit being given to workers, because of bubbles which may be there. But the moment these bubbles burst once more, this major structural crisis of capitalism manifests itself. Now, in this situation, we do not have a world state that can actually, as it were, provide demand management for the world economy. Even the United States, which some believe is the world state, is not in a position to do so, and in fact austerity is being forced even upon the United States state. There is no, as Keynes had suggested, coordinated fiscal stimulus among a number of states which in their collectivity could in fact act as a proxy for the world state. Now, that being the case, I do visualize that this kind of a crisis, I think Bush-Montes talked about is lasting 5 years. Maybe there would be another bubble which might temporarily lift the world economy out of the current crisis, but that would burst again. So we are really in a period of protracted structural crisis. Now, periods like this are periods in which obviously countries of the third world, especially large countries, as happened in the 1930s in Latin America, would tend to delink themselves, look much more at their internal markets, home markets, and develop alternative trajectories of growth based on the home market. But this does not preclude the possibility of greater cooperation among these countries. For instance, I believe that to start with, it's possible we can begin with the BRICS, for instance, but on the other hand, it can be extended to other third world countries. It's possible to think in terms of a coordinated fiscal expansion in this region, making sure that this fiscal expansion, on the one hand, is confined, as it were, to this region, and making sure that it does not give rise to greater indebtedness of any one country within the region to another country within the region. In other words, inside this bloc, you could actually have a fiscal expansion whose effects don't necessarily spill out to others, but on the other hand, they do not also cause greater indebtedness of some country within it to another. Let me give an example. I mean, this is purely an example. I was thinking about it. Not that I'm pushing for this. Suppose, for instance, you have within BRICS, or one can generalize it to an even larger group of countries, one can generalize it to the third world as a whole. You have, let us say, an association of central banks giving or creating an SDR type new money which has a fixed exchange rate vis-a-vis all the domestic currencies of the concerned countries. It has a fixed lifetime, and of course, it's given to the different countries on the basis of the agreed amount of fiscal deficits that they wish to run. In which case, basically what you're doing is that fiscal deficits are being run. These can then be redeemed against the traditional currencies of the countries and within a certain given period. So you can make sure that no country accumulates more of these than its own fiscal deficit it has pledged itself to, in which case there is no greater indebtedness of one country to another. And at the same time, you can make sure that insofar as it has a fixed lifetime, everybody is going to spend it. And of course, the expenditure would be within the area itself, but create no major kind of, borrowing or lending problems. I mean, no internal debt problems. In other words, the area over which the multiplier would operate would be larger, but on the other hand, we can actually have a scheme that makes sure that within this region there is no indebtedness of one country to another that rises. Now, I'm just giving this as an example. I think it's possible for a school like this, which would be having extraordinarily talented people, precisely because of the fact that Brazil is in such a peculiarly advantageous position, to devise possibilities of cooperation within the third world as a whole, even as individual countries may actually be going towards greater delinking from the world economy dominated by the advanced capitalist countries. One can even go further. One can actually say that a lot of this expenditure financed by such fiscal deficit is expenditure that may well be geared in a way that actually also raises supplies. In other words, as someone said yesterday, it is not just digging holes and filling them up. That would generate demand, no doubt. But on the other hand, it can, for instance, take the form of raising agricultural production. It can take the form of helping the peasantry, helping the wage goods sector to develop, in which case the potential for inflation could also be kept in check, even as a demand stimulus is being given, because then with a time lag, supplies would also be forthcoming. Now, any such proposal, of course, is a proposal which is going to be resisted by the advanced countries. And of course, it will be resisted not just, as it were, at the level of political economy, it will be intellectually resisted. Now, I think, therefore, it's very important that if the school is going to play the role of, I mean, mine was just one illustration. If the school is going to play the role of suggesting, as it were, broader policies of cooperation, policies that can be adopted along an alternative development trajectory by not just Brazil, not just the middle-income countries, but by the third world as a whole, then the ideas underlying this research must prevent them from, I mean, must not get hegemonized by the ideas coming from the advanced countries. Now, that is extremely important. Now, I have been in the academic world for over 4 decades, and I see in front of me the innumerable mechanisms of hegemonization, professionalization. You cannot, for instance, get a job unless it is the case that you are published in a refereed journal. And what are these refereed journals? The refereed journals are journals of the North, which are dominated by traditional mainstream thinking. So these are ways of actually coercing, ways of enforcing subservience in thinking to the dominant traditions. Now, I think any such school which actually wants to have an alternative agenda and an agenda of use to the third world as a whole, not just to Brazil, of course to Brazil, but also to others, is a school that must resist getting hegemonized in this manner. Thank you.
I guess go for it. Thank you, all the speakers. Do you have time for the coffee break, and then we'll have the discussion later on. 15 minutes or for the coffee break? Okay, good. Okay. Please help me to identify. So now it's open for, the floor is open for questions, interventions, and so on. Please, who will start? May I?
Yes. I can also.
As you, As you realize, I am not an economist. I'm far away from your field. And then, start from the speech of Professor Yan. It came to my mind that is it possible? That's a question for everyone. To, let's say, set up a system for evaluating our green economy. Is it possible to estimate at least the value of environment, of forests, water, resources, mangroves, for instance, which is very important for India, for all the Asian countries, for Australia, and then of course for Brazil. Is that possible, Professor? To estimate the value of this, to help us to improve our national gross product. Is it possible? Sure. Great. How?
That's why we have this school.
Yes, that's why we have the school.
So anybody wants to make some comments on that?
Gary Jeans.
Okay, so Georgie, I'll respond saying that I'm not environmental economist, but let me work through a couple of ideas that touch on what's different about this group. First, there are models where people will take you take the perspective of human society, and then you say, for example, with the mangroves, what's the net value added for Indian GDP within a conceivable time period that comes specifically from products that are generated by the mangroves and all of that. We come up with a figure. We then do a present discounted value of that, bring it to forward and basically say, here's a number. And essentially, if we can think of an alternative use, we being the economist in question, if we can think of an alternative use of that, then basically that could be higher. Like, let's build ports so as to maximize the export of some products from India to elsewhere, and they happen to destroy the mangroves, then it's not a problem. Just do it, because the present value calculation tells you that essentially there's more cash flow in option A than option B. What's missing in that are, of course, several things. First of all, there's no valuation to the integration of the mangroves and the communities that are involved there, the cultural practices and societies around that. So when Jan, I think, was talking about the privileging of economics, within the discourse of social science, that would be set aside and actually not valued. Second thing, there are economists in environmental institutions around the world, and they've been at this calculation since the work on the Stockholm Accords that preceded Rio 92 and so on, that supply kind of the agenda for people who are, if you will, mainstream thinkers in environmental economics. They set the agenda more than 20 years ago and are pursuing that agenda, and the fundamental precept is that we think from the viewpoint of the spillover effects of these things, of environmental destruction. So we think the spillover means spillover compared to a human use. So the fundamental perspective is the one that I just mentioned. What about the human beings? Taking just the cash flow perspective. So what's necessary is basically to find a different way of thinking the economics. And the other comment that I would make is, at Leeds, I'm building an economic center now that is reaching out to the geographers, the earth environment people, the engineers, and others. It's a very broad-based enterprise. In those schools, in those different communities of non-economists, are people who are trying to think very differently in a more progressive and holistic way that does not discount the future, but thinks of the globe as a holistic reality that's very fragile, and where we have to think about, how we're going to the entire, let's say, globe can move into the future. These are people who need economists that think differently, and this workshop, this institute that we're talking about, can contribute to that. In part, let me just make a final comment, just in answer to your question. In part because that economist that's sitting there thinking about the present value and all of that, and thinking in a very cold, calculating way, is going to be thinking as a supply side, what we might call a supply side economist, from a general equilibrium perspective. They're not going to be thinking about Keynesian multiplier effects. They're not going to be thinking about disequilibrium effects, about innovative jumps, about new products that could be created if you left the mangroves in place. They've got a way of thinking that puts their minds into boxes. And the potential for this institute is to kind of create a space where the kinds of innovative ideas that we just saw Prabhat come out with for thinking differently about a world system, this is a space where you can basically create a kind of an architecture of ideas, think about the way that you could structure the research, build the ideas differently, and come up with in some sense, the institutional ability embodied in a set of empowered people working both in government ministries and in the academy, who can stand up and who can articulate a different vision so we can have the global debate. If this alternative community of scholars and policymakers doesn't come into existence, then that debate is controlled by people who think they already know the solutions and are thinking one-dimensionally. So that's kind of what can be added by this, I think, or one way of looking at it.
Thank you very much. Please help.
Eu gostaria.
Quem que está primeiro?
Eu,
Manuel, então. Por favor, please. Manuel Heitor, please. E depois Fernando Costa. You, sir. You, sir.
Again, by taking your challenge, and in addition to what has just been said, and I do believe that when one regards issues of policy and of public policy impact, we certainly look at forms that I will call essentially to be endogenous to each regional and specific context. And therefore, again, and following what I tried to present yesterday, I believe one of our main challenges in such a type of school is to bring together people that can be associated with new fieldwork in different regional and local contexts. And I believe that will be the main challenge for us to succeed in not only training new people, but at the same time trying to build new data sets and essentially new experiences. Again, the debates in many different parts of the world, certainly in Brazil, but also in China or in Russia, or even in many European contexts, has been very much the challenge to understand the local context. And for many of us that have already been engaged in policy and many times in political duties and in government, we know that the debate in the policy arena does depend very much on specific local context, which many times goes beyond the pure academic debate. And therefore, the challenge to mix research students and academic faculty with policy leaders, and again involving in new data sets and new case studies in very specific local context, may be able to provide us a completely new insights into the details of local public policies, which I do believe can be a major contribution of this school. And there are many other ideas. One which I threw out yesterday was essentially to try to arrange this type of advanced schools with preliminary fieldwork in different contexts, so that the school itself could also be one way to discuss different results and different experiences, and that could be arranged in a way to provide a new insight in development policies if we look at experiences from people in different regional contexts. And certainly Brazil do provide a unique opportunity and certainly a very interesting challenge to understand which are the instruments and the impact of policies in different regional contexts, either in northeastern of Brazil or in the south or in the western part of Brazil, and compare them with other international experiences, namely INESA, among others. But the idea to develop specific case studies and to look at the practical experience of public policies could be a very interesting challenge to answer to your goals. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Fernando Costa, please.
Eu acho que a pergunta do presidente da CAPES foi um excelente exemplo de um desafio para o encontro multidisciplinar de várias profissões. Ele fez uma pergunta extremamente simples e extremamente difícil de responder, que é: qual o valor do meio ambiente? Um economista diria que o valor é atribuído pelo mercado. Para você organizar o meio ambiente, as forças naturais como ativos, formas de manutenção de riqueza, você teria que organizar o mercado secundário dos bens naturais. Enquanto você não usar trabalho para isso, você não tem uma teoria de valor trabalho para precificar isso. Então passa a ser o que os agentes econômicos atribuem àquilo. As diferentes forças atribuem aquilo. Isso é uma coisa extremamente perigosa. Se você criar um mercado livre de bens naturais, você pode chegar... Eu vou ilustrar através de um exemplo. Chegar a uma situação tal como o mercado livre de energia nos anos 90 na Califórnia, onde se comprava e vendia energia. Aí o mercado, através da Enron, que era a 7ª maior empresa dos Estados Unidos, passou a vender energia para um estado para escassear a energia na Califórnia. A Califórnia passou a ter blackouts, paralisou, houve uma série de acidentes, gente morta, um apagão muito pior do que houve no Brasil, e o preço da energia subiu. Aí eles venderam, tiveram lucros fabulosos. Eles acreditavam que sempre o preço da energia ia subir. Até que a bolha explodiu, a Enron quebrou. E o presidente da Enron, toda a diretoria, foi para a cadeia. Esse é um exemplo brasileiro. Os ambientalistas controlaram o investimento em energia limpa, na matriz hidrelétrica, através do controle. Existia no menos potencial da usina Belmonte. A previsão é que se use muito mais energia termodinâmica, muito mais poluente do que a matriz hidrelétrica. Então, um grande desafio é combinar desenvolvimentismo com ambientalismo. Por quê? São áreas que falam linguagem diferente. Como nós vimos, eu vou fazer uma síntese, porque já está um dia final do seminário, o grande desafio dessa escola e desse workshop, que mostrou bem, no primeiro dia de manhã, nós estudamos macroeconomia pós-keynesiana. Finanças, macroeconomia e finanças, como reunir finanças com macroeconomia. À tarde, o debate sobre o papel do Estado e ciência política. Na manhã seguinte, o debate foi reunir macroeconomia com microeconomia, pós-keynesianismo com neo-schumpeterianismo. E aí os cientistas politicólogos reclamaram: e o Estado, onde está? À tarde, nós vimos experiências de integração multidisciplinar, experiência de vanguarda, como a Universidade do ABC, de fazer 3 grandes áreas de conhecimento, integrando desde a formação diferentes disciplinas. Em seguida, nós tivemos um depoimento do professor da Universidade da Califórnia, falando que eles tentaram isso, mas o mercado de trabalho não acompanhou. Não absorveu os profissionais formados com maneira multidisciplinar. E hoje o desafio é como integrar esse conhecimento da universidade com política pública, com patentes, com direitos, com contratos, como precificar esses valores. Então, eu acho que esse é uma discussão de vanguarda. A necessidade do conhecimento multidisciplinar, o mercado de trabalho usa profissionais com formação generalista, mas ele seleciona ainda por profissões. Ou seja, esse é o papel da vanguarda. Ver para onde a história está avançando. E eu vou finalizar também, falar uma lição que eu tive para entender essa proposta. No momento que a gente vive, com acesso universal a mensagens todas, a internet, a todos os papers, é muito mais barato você trazer grandes professores do exterior, fazer uma imersão de 15 semanas para 30 alunos, do que mandar 30 alunos 2 anos e meio no exterior. Então, isso é um desafio que eu diria, pelo menos para os países do terceiro mundo. A gente vai formar em escala muito maior e de forma muito mais barata fazendo isso.
Muito obrigado, professor. Ana.
I would like to come back to the policy impact. I have a tremendous difficulty to understand how to have a policy impact. I cannot understand really as an academic. It's really difficult to me to understand this. And I'd like to come back to the experience George mentioned when we organized this Lato Sensu program to patent examiners. We had 16 courses, disciplines, and also 8 research groups. The whole conception was made by Jorge, Beatriz, who were yesterday here, and maybe myself. We built this architecture of this Lato Sensu program. And the consequences were really very impressive because this course was directed to patent examiners. And the main consequence of this program, it was the shared belief that in patent rights or intellectual property rights, one size does not fit all. So this was very subversive. And I think that knowledge can be very subversive. And this is the real political impact that a program like this one can have, can deliver. So I think, what is policy impact? When you do training or capacity building, you really are having an enormous policy impact. And this can be very effective. So I really ask myself what policy impact is in fact.
I may justify why I put this question for a couple of reasons. But first is because in April, not decided date yet, we are organizing at CAPES a meeting concerned to this subject, how to evaluate our environment. And I like very much our interventions because they were very important. And then we're going to have another one in Cambridge because we will be discussing there this subject based in a study that has been done for India by the people from economics in Cambridge that Professor Prahat may know them. So it means that we'll be challenged to work on this subject somehow. So you are here among our specialists, so that's why I put this question. Second is because one student of mine is 1 year or 2 years ago said, Professor, why don't you look for mangrove? I am a biochemist myself. For those who are not familiar with this word, and Brazilians, mangrove is our manguezais. And you manguezais. Mangrove is the environment ecosystem that is water, salted water and land. You know.
Thanks for clarifying.
Okay.
I had no idea.
So let's tell you something very surprising. Then we decide to work on this. First of all, we discovered many bacteria that would be very important for production of ethanol. For instance, this paper is under evaluation by a very specialized international journal. We made the metagenomics, so we decide what's there. Second, is because we thought that there was several-fold more research in Antarctica than in mangrove, which is stupid.
Yes.
And for the price, no comparison. For the costs, for no comparison. So how come? Antarctica. Many more work, research and publications done in mangrove, which is close to the people that live in from that ecosystem. They survive, and this is it's very important for the third world. Then I will challenge you. Please put in the Spiderweb this subject, to involve people,
But
to say
this
how
idea
can
of-
you calculate that. He said
Yeah.
it's not easy, but
It's okay,
you
but
can
it's
discover some way
it's a
to
challenge.
evaluate what this really means.
Yeah, but this idea of having research groups, as we built in that experience, can be very useful, because then you have a focus to aggregate the research side of it.
Very much multidisciplinary, which is
Yes.
very important also. Okay, so who is? Please.
Well, thank you very much. As I think I'm going to say something completely different from what I said yesterday. And, no, change. I mean, it's like a Monty Python, and now for something completely different, rather than. And I would like to focus on your question on policy impact and on the subject of this. I'm trying to summarize some experience of trying to do this for quite a few years. First, your question, what is policy impact? And I'll come to that. Well, I think that there are a way of defining it, and a way of dealing with it is, do you have an impact when you do two things? First of all, when you change the frame of mind with which those who have to make a decision appreciate the situation. So if you shift the way in which they view the problem, the world, the setting, that's one part. And the second part, and more practical, which come from some of the examples, is if you change the criteria with which they evaluate the specific decisions that they have to take. And on this subject of the time value of money and the discount rate, so much has been written that, it's one of the greatest nonsense of economics in my view, but that's another story. So that is to me. So then the question becomes a key one. Is like, how is it that you change frames of mind and criteria for decision making? And let me just offer 3 different subjects for the study of policy impact. The first one is to recognize that those who make decisions, especially in complex settings in the government, have a completely different logic than those who produce the knowledge in a research setting. And half the problems I have seen emerge because especially the researchers are not prepared to accept, quote unquote, the rational way in which policymakers behave. And policymakers are not prepared the sort of highfalutin and totally abstract and irrelevant way in which the researchers think. So the first task is to understand each other's logic. And by the way, this is not a general theory. Each policy context has its own peculiarities and characteristics and cultural sort of quirks. So you need to really either experience actual policy making as a researcher to understand the pressures that all of us who have been involved on that face, and then not forget them when you're doing your own research and producing knowledge and so on. So you really need to understand the real and minute constraints that are on action that come at every moment. So I remember some friends of mine who were telling me, Francisco, it's so obvious. I mean, you have to do this and that. You know, everybody agrees with that, and it's very easy to implement that, except that they didn't understand that you need to have 3 authorizations from the budget for this. You have this other guy, the personality of this guy who really holds a grudge because 7 years ago you did something that really upset her, and she's not prepared to do it. I mean, those stupid little things, but if you don't understand that those are part and parcel of everyday policy making, you run the risk of producing beautiful documents, beautiful things that will stay at that level. So that's one. The second thing is what are the ways in which you change mindset and you help to shape common sense? And I think that the example that was given also is very clear. I mean, if you open the minds of people and change their default settings for appreciating a situation, you have achieved a tremendous success in doing that. And this can be done by training new people, as we have said in some program, or by recycling old people. And the settings that were described yesterday of a retreat where you talk to people and you are more relaxed, and they are much more congenial for opening your minds and being able to take other things. So educate and recycle. Then there are 2 other aspects that have to do with mass media. And one of the main problems that I see with most researchers is that they have no idea on how to talk in television. I mean, the immediate temptation is, okay, I will make a presentation. I have 3 minutes. I'll start with the premises, then I'll go to this, and then I'll explain that, and so on and so forth. And then, lo and behold, it's logical. No way. If you don't start with that sort of soundbite that captures the audience, that you cannot summarize your arguments in 2 minutes, you're dead. So one of the things we need to do is to train people to do that. And frankly, I have very seldom seen media training when dealing with a school or any graduate program that tries to teach policy-oriented research and policy impact. And this is essential in my view. And then we have a very serious problem when we come to policy impact, because, and the problem has to do with evaluation, something that that in all public agencies face, whether the programs are killed or they stay and so on. To change minds, it's a long-term process. You don't do it in 2 days, and the manifestations usually come 2, 3, 4, 5 years later. And there is no, so while you do that, you have to be very smart and identify what some immediate results that you can sort of point out so that you won't be cut when they are evaluated. Second, what are the consequences that those results have and able to trace them. And then only finally impact in terms of changing mindsets and criteria. That will come, 5, 10 years from now. In about a month and a half, we're going to be engaged in this program that I mentioned yesterday, the 40-year evaluation of the science and technology policy instruments projects that we started. I think that's about the time to see whether we had an impact in policy making in Brazil, in Korea, in Peru, in Colombia, in India, and many other places where we did a study. So that's it. And then finally, is the question of the tactics. And on this is what I would love to see, but I've never seen this, but this will be wonderful, is a kind of handbook of local tactics to get around public sector bureaucrats. For example, how do you identify the weak spots? Who is really in a very complicated situation that you can pressure? Or how can you identify your ally? The person that listens. And this means simply learning to notice that in a meeting like this, at one end there is someone who, whenever you speak, says, you latch onto that person and work with that. Second, how to piggyback on priorities that are already accepted. And we have seen these many examples. If you have a priority for education in mangroves, for example, then try to justify a program on space technology because of mangroves. And you have to have the capacity to really link up and organize yourself in a way that you say, but in order to do this, you need that. It's obvious to everybody. And then you get around. Anyway, then is the whole question of sequencing, how you manage to bypass and so on. So in short, The first question is to understand the logics of those who are making policy and making decisions, and how is it that you can help them and so on. Second, how to change the common sense and mindsets, and finally, how to use tactics. But those things are simply not used in practice, are not taught, are not even discussed. When I tried to propose this in one place, I think it was in the US, I was looked at as if it was, I mean, you're cheapening our academic sort of, you are not really being an academic. And say, well, okay, if you want to remain in your ivory tower, gate. But if you want to talk about policy impact, you have to deal with this as well. Thank you.
But I guess I have some. Yeah.
Thank you. So actually, in terms of policy impact, because I have run a research center in Tsinghua for 8 years, and the policy impact is actually the first thing we need to think. And so, because we got a sponsor from a multinational company, and this company pay much attention on our policy impact. So I will briefly mention the things we do for how to improve our policy impact. So first of all, we do education program to the officials. So in our school, we have two kind of level of education program to the part-time officials, but the courses are conducted in the weekend or the evening. So so they are kind of part-time or on job training, but they do get degree on MPA or executive MPA. So by doing this, we have a widespread alumni network around the whole country. So we have a lot of information about what the high level government concern and what the real situations the policy be implemented in the local level. So we do have very accurate sense about the policy. That conduct us by two ways. One is with how we select the policy issue to which we could know which policy issue should be studied, should be researched. And the other way is we know how to deliver our policy research results. We know how to deliver the result to the high-level officials, and also how to communicate with the local level officials. And the second issue, we do the policy, basically we do the major policy research projects voluntarily. As we know what's the concern by the top-level officials in China. For example, systematical healthcare system reform or financial system reform, or how to build an environment evaluation system in China. So we do these policies voluntarily. We use our own money, like around 1 million RMB for one research project. We invited the most excellent people around the world, from US, from European, from and China, and we do propose the policy proposals. Then we joined the discussions in our government. So by doing this, we improve our policy impact dramatically. And the third thing is, we think the publication, because in our academic system, might be the journal paper is the number one, the most important thing for us. But for the government and for the society, the books is more more easily to be recognized. So we pay a lot of attention on book publication. We have two series of book publication. One is we translate a lot of policy issues book from English in Chinese, and we pay money for that book, for translation, for publication. Then we send this book directly to the government, to our official students. I mean, to the students from government. So they benefit from this book. And the other series of book is our research project report. Basically, we will have each project we have a research report, but usually we just put it on website, but that not enough for our officials. For we deliver in two ways. One is just send them book. The other is we write some policy briefings, send them by email and by mails. So they got information frankly from our center. So they can, our center are easily to be recognized. That's the way. And the other thing, the third thing, or the fourth thing, I think, to improve our impact is we provide special topics, seminars, or series of lectures and based on our research project. For example, we just finished a project about how to improve the environmental governance in China, in the city, because right now China is in a quick urbanization stage, but there are a lot of problems in the city governance. So after this, we invite people come from Japan to do this research, and the Japanese style research is very detailed. So we think it's not enough to just finish the book, then see, and then over. Then we invite him to give a series of lectures to the MPA student, master of public administration, and other students. They come by themselves, and just it's open lectures, and they can know very detailed policy measures to to improve the environment governance in China. So here's, I think, the things we can do for your school.
Thank you very much. Shut up.
Just a short comment on the policy impact. I think that the nature of the work of the policymaker or of the decision maker, both in the public and in the private sector, is something that has to be taken into account if you want to have policy impact. In general, policymakers, they have a generally not very well defined mission, and a very short period of time to understand the situation, propose something to be done, and deliver results. So this is the general environment for policy making and decision taking, and so I think that for you to have policy impact, you have really to engage these people in the discussions. I think that producing materials, everything is valid, everything is useful, but I think that if you are able to bring people to tables like this one. We had here in this bank a very interesting experience, which was led during several years by Reis Veloso. He managed to bring to a table like this several ministers, and most of them, I think, were very much concerned with the discussions. The simple fact that they accept to come and have to say clever things, oblige them to think on the subject. This is true. So and then they come and they listen to things they are not used to listen. And so I particularly think that the most effective way of producing results is bringing people which may be relevant in the process of policy making to the table and put them together with the group discussing on the most important issues.
Thank you, George. Please.
Thank you very much. On policy implementation, some of the experience we've had with different kinds of think tanks that I've been involved with in Washington are perhaps relevant. You have a meeting and an audience with questions, and you think that that is the way to influence policy, and you look very carefully at who has come. Is it someone who's a major advisor to the State Department or not? Or is it somebody who usually comes for the free lunch? But you realize pretty quickly that all of these people are really actors. they're props. And if you can present on the web the content of this meeting, and you give it relevance because you have so many people there, that gets hit again and again and again and again and again. But it takes money. To have a department or a group or specialist that is filming and then editing and then putting it on the web in ways that are reachable. You access people, in our case, all over the world. But in Brazil, it would be, if it's in Portuguese, heavily in Brazil and Portugal. And you may have, if it's in English, like this one. But your audience and your impact is so much wider than just who's attending the meeting or who your students happen to be. But it's a whole separate channel or avenue for influence. And this is my second point, is that when we try to think about how to influence policy, we're really talking about how to influence this huge edifice, this huge structure of existing inertial ways of doing things that haven't changed. And there are two models. One is you come along and you start chipping away at it. And you say, oh, no, this isn't right, and you could change this. That's one way, and that may be good. The other way is to set up a separate edifice, a separate structure that's smaller when you begin, and is reasonable, but has a very different way of looking at these things. And as events occur, as crises come, people see that this edifice, the larger edifice, didn't solve the problem, and they look at this one and they try, and if it's a good edifice, you gradually will attract decision makers, you will attract resources to this coherent, completely coherent body that's just not a critique. It's not a negative approach to the existing edifice. It's instead a positive alternative but it needs to be bulked up, but it will be bulked up by crises and events that find out the big edifice doesn't work. And so I think Spider can be that kind of an alternative edifice, and it can have a global reach if it has a good internet exposure. And so I'm interested a lot in Professor Patnick's idea of a regional bloc, but I'm not sure you need an SDR. If it could be a group that encourages certain standards for domestic economic management that include control of capital flows, include some infant industry ideas, that include optimizing your for-profit financial system so it can feed funds into public investment, those things that are not encouraged by the for-profit financial sector. But it's a collection of policies that also can manage demand well, so that you don't have swings of up and down. You're not reliant on exports, but you have learned how to really manage your domestic economy. You will gain in international competitiveness. But you need a group of countries, and I think I mentioned a couple days ago that India and China, Brazil and China in particular, but India also, working together to encourage other countries to have those standards for domestic economic management, could be part of this kind of edifice, and I would like to see to do that. And fourthly, on mangroves, I thought Professor Dymski's side was a wonderful summary, and the two places there that I latch onto are externalities. There are a whole range of things, and you mentioned uses for the mangrove swamps, the wetlands that aren't really well understood or even realized yet. But there is also the discount rate, because the for-profit market would say, oh, well, you need rates of return that are high, and that means that very quickly the longer distance benefits are discounted to zero, and you don't have the effect of what is an infinite time horizon. And so that one of the things we've talked about in this Spider is the nature of leadership. Leadership isn't short-sighted. Leadership is long viewing, but it can handle short-term problems. But it's not myopic. And if you long-term, and if your values are long-term, your discount rate is very low, because you're taking into consideration things that, as you would say, representative of broad democratic government rather than the influence of special financial interests. If you have that longer look, the discount rate is a lot lower, and the valuation of the mangrove wetlands with all of the externalities is just enormous. And you cannot say, yes, let's get rid of it and put a harbor in, because the valuation by their own terms, but with leadership involved in setting the parameters, makes the decision of quite obvious. Anyway.
Who's next? Please.
Okay, thank you, Anna Celia, for bringing the topic of what is policy impact actually today. And to be honest, I'm still a little bit shocked with the elections in Italy, because it's not just another fantastic Italian party, but it's probably a critical moment in development of European democracy, but also world democracy, because we can see three consequences. And I have a little bit jet lag here in Rio, so I get up at 5 o'clock in the morning so I could listen to the radio or read some material from Europe, from newest information. And there are some consequences, like first of all, internet. You can build up actually a party basing only on internet, and also a group of people who could be addressed with your idea. This is the first issue. The second, the end of traditional political parties. They will disappear. So it means that maybe slowly you don't need so much connections with political parties which base on very traditional structures. And the third impact, the future policies will be based on clear procedures. So this is one of the most important messages from these elections. In the future, there will be a greater power of lawyers and procedures, and I think for the school is important. If the school doesn't want to be in competitive relation with other similar institutions and bring knowledge in a very traditional way, it should maybe analyze what does it mean in Brazil today, a procedure in going from an idea to a solution. Now it's probably still basing on a quite traditional measures, but it will probably change also very quickly. So these formalized procedures will be, and basing also on referendum, a kind of referendum to every kind of problem in economic and political system. This will be connected with that. And just maybe two points. First of all, it would be good to look at such projects, initiatives like Coursera, Udacity, TED, which spread knowledge in internet. Having also this international group, you could offer even comparisons and present it via such widely opened internet platform. And just an example how the private business uses it. McKinsey, the global consulting company, has 4 knowledge centers in the world, in Shanghai, Sao Paulo, New Delhi, and one in Wrocław in Poland. And they work closely together. For example, if in Brazil there is one solution needed in health care policy, they quickly compare it with European solutions, Indian solutions, and Chinese solutions. And in this way they get a very clear knowledge which is expected by the procedure makers. Yeah? Okay, thank you.
Who's next? Please.
This very interesting discussion. I was just thinking it would be also helpful, it's actually following on your shock from the Italian elections. And it's the question, whenever we talk about policy impact, we also have to consider what are we trying to impact against to a certain degree. And I remember having a conversation once with Sarah Cook, I think some of you might know, who's now the head of UNREST in Geneva, the UN Research Institute of Social Development. And we were discussing precisely this swing to the right that happened following on the financial crisis. Ironically, the financial crisis should have been, maybe not so much in Brazil, but at least in Europe and North America, the financial crisis should have been an opportunity for the left to gain more momentum. And yet it was really the right to, sorry to use the sort of very crude terms, but it was the right that really took advantage of the crisis, often through very simplistic narratives, right? And we saw that, in Netherlands, for instance, this crazy right-wing party of Geert Wilders that is openly racist and would probably be banned from speaking in Canada, won close to 25% of the vote in 2010 in the midst of the depth of the crisis. So, what Sarah was reflecting is that often we find that the left has been very weak at creating very seductive narratives that are simple for the public to really grasp onto and hold on to. And actually, in this sense, I often one story I always tell my students when they're thinking about research is an advice that Robert Wade gave me at the very beginning of my PhD. And he basically sat a bunch of us down for lunch and said, think of a good title. I'm sure you tell people that still. And I mean, in that sense, the master of good titles has been He Chang, of course, with Kicking Away the Ladder. It's one message that people constantly take away. It's very easy to absorb. And I think when we think about policy impact, policy briefs are very useful when we're talking about communicating with policymakers because, again, at LSE, when I started working there, we did actually have a 2-day workshop where part of it was training us to communicate with the media and so on. And one of the things they told us was that when you're communicating with policymakers, your communication has to be about as brief as something that they can read from the moment they leave the car to the point they get into their office, and which is usually about half a page at most. And if you can contain your message within that amount of space, then you might have a chance that they'll actually pay attention to you. And I think even less than that, how do we even, without simplifying our message, without sort of bastardizing it or whatever, to the point that the right has, how do you create these simple narratives that can actually have a very potent political impact that can swing the public debate to the direction that you want to take it towards? I mean, I think as academics, we don't like to do that because we see the world in such a complex way, and yet that's often some of the most powerful ways to actually have policy and political impact. And so that was just a few thoughts.
Who is...
Obrigado, Ana Célia. I think my English is worse than my Portuguese, so I will speak in something similar to Portuguese. Pensando no caráter policy-oriented da escola, eu estava lembrando artigo do Perry Anderson, né, sobre o triunfo do neoliberalismo, no qual ele explica a relação estreita entre intelectuais, Hayek para aqui, organizações, Cato, Fraser, Heritage, aquelas organizações que só têm a porta na direita, e governos para recomendar políticas e levar para frente políticas. E ele foi uma palestra que ele deu em Buenos Aires, falava, bom, agora o desafio é pensar isso, o pós-neoliberalismo, muito antes de a gente pensar. Eu acho que o desafio, que em termos de caráter político, como a escola engajar compromisso acadêmico e político em termos da nova agenda de desenvolvimento. E o desafio seria duplo, né? Por um lado, pensar, e aqui estou recuperando um texto do professor Nogueira, o duplo desafio normativo e positivo. Por um lado, pensar o capitalismo nas condições atuais do século XXI, como ele funciona, né? Como as relações são feitas, pensar os empresários, repensar os políticos, o que Sebastián está levantando, muito interessante. A democracia é outra democracia. Talvez os partidos políticos tenham menos poder para processar políticas públicas, organizações, instituições, empresas, não sei como será daqui para frente, mas é verdade que os partidos políticos como são pensados já não vão ter o mesmo espaço em termos de processar políticas. Pensar essa agenda, pensar metodologias, pensar um marco teórico, que acho é um grande desafio, juntar iniciativas e também como difundir aquilo que a escola vai pensar. Mas, por outro lado, também não pensar o capitalismo como é, mas o capitalismo como ele devia ser. E aí acho que o caráter policy-oriente, recomendar políticas. E aí, por isso, eu lembrava de Perry Anderson. Ele falava, a Sociedade de Montpellerin, que era uma coisa, um grupo pequeno de reacionários lá na Suíça, foi muito exitosa em convertir uma ideia minoritária em hegemônica. Eu acho que o desafio, claro que excede a escola, né, vai além desse esforço, mas o compromisso da escola devia ser nesse sentido, um forte engajamento acadêmico, mas também político no sentido amplo da palavra, né, em termos de pensar o desenvolvimento. É uma agenda, só para acabar, a agenda, claro que tem que incluir os temas que foram aqui muito bem explicados, que vão ser pela tarde com a mesa da China, que todos estamos aí esperando. Inovação, o papel das capacidades estatais, Estado, falamos muito pouco de pobreza e desigualdade, muito menos do que eu gostaria. A América Latina cresceu 10 anos, nos últimos 10 anos, e ainda tem 170 milhões de pessoas baixo da linha de pobreza. Eu acho que tem que estar na agenda muito mais. Políticas sociais em geral, mas também, e aqui para falar, não só políticas de inclusão, assim, transferências condicionadas, de integração, voltar a ter sociedades integradas. E aí, bom, a agenda podia passar por aí, mas também com outros temas que acho que vão. E a ideia de formar grupos de pesquisa eu acho ótima, né? Porque, do contrário, assim, como fazer o link entre ensino, formar pós-doutorados e tudo mais, e pesquisa, né? Com a tecnologia hoje, a gente pode ter grupos virtuais, como o Claxo tem. E, bom, eu queria parabenizar mais uma vez a Ana Célia, porque, na verdade, ela enviava e-mails 4 da manhã, 5 da manhã, só uma pessoa com o fôlego que ela tem pode levar isso para frente.
Thank you. We have 5 minutes left. Okay. I know.
You sent me a note very interesting. We should socialize this information.
This was on policy impact. I just made the point that all British universities at the moment are in a complete upheaval, going through an exercise called the REF. These are the fatal initials, REF. REF stands for Research Excellence Framework, and it involves the process of assessing the quality of the output of the research output of every single academic department, every single university, according to a whole set of formal criteria. And part of this assessment involves policy impact case studies. And policy impact case studies, if you as an academic or you as an academic department can produce one or more policy impact case studies to show that you have had a direct impact on policy, then this is worth a huge amount of public funding for the next round, much more than if you publish one paper in the American Economic Review. And these policy impact case studies are written according to a very formal template. For example, I publish quite a lot in newspapers like, for example, the Financial Times or the Herald Tribune or the Guardian, but that does not count as policy impact. You have to be able to show that you said something which had a sort of one-to-one connection with something that some policy maker actually did. And people are spending huge amounts of time trying to write their own policy impact statements with all kinds of documentation. But I don't know much more about it than that because I cannot produce one. But other people can. In fact, LSE has produced 200 policy impact case studies, and the directors are hoping that this will bring a great deal of money. But from well, but it doesn't count. So my point is simply that if you are concerned with policy, Anna Celia said she didn't know how to assess policy impacts. I'm saying there is this methodology out there. Whether you regard it as satisfactory or not is another question, but there is a methodology. I don't know it. Perhaps Gary, who probably has gone through this exercise as head of a research institute, knows how this methodology is done and knows something about to what extent it might be used here.
Só podia dar exemplo. Eu queria dar exemplo, porque quando ele falava, eu olhei a foto da minha ex-aluna. Eu fui professor de economia monetária e financeira. E quando ela coordenou o Banco Central com o Ministério da Fazenda, acabou com a ideia de Banco Central independente, abaixou a taxa de juros, eu a vi novamente. Então, para ver o impacto de políticos nos políticos, ver o currículo vitae deles, ver quantos fizeram doutorados, mestrado, em que universidade, quais seus professores. Impacto nos partidos, ver quantos dirigentes partidários passaram pela universidade. Quantos profissionais do setor privado são reciclados. Quando você forma uma elite intelectual, você está formando política pública. O efeito é via formação de quadros. E outro aspecto é formar opinião pública, que aí é divulgar na TV, divulgar na internet, usar todos os meios de comunicação, que os cientistas têm pouca experiência da capacidade da síntese. Mas o ponto importante do impacto político, a meu ver, é a formação de quadros. E você forma quadros, bons quadros, fazendo pesquisa. Aí você forma quadros de vanguarda. Obrigado.
Yeah, let me just say a couple of things. Strangely enough, for 7 years, I was founder of the University of California Policy Center in the state capital, Sacramento. And actually, we had a lot of impact by listening to so much of what's been said, and Fernando and Francisco and others, it's fantastic. But by listening to the political leadership, paying attention to what issues were on the top of the table for them, and finding people that were capable of those half-page statements and putting them together in a way where they could be heard. Strangely enough, we were very effective, partly because we were almost invisible. We just were taking care of business. And in fact, there was one moment when the University of California Office of President said, how come we have a message? They had paid a consultant to have something called the Power of 10, 10 campuses, and we're very important for the economic impact. They said, why aren't you bringing that to Sacramento and having speakers about the Power of 10 of the University of California? And of course, the answer was that everybody in the political community in California thought that was the dumbest idea they had ever heard. And we didn't want to waste anybody's time. So, the fact of the matter was that the academics knew nothing. I mean, you're right on the money. They didn't know anything about what they were doing in that respect. In the fact that we were very effective in running an operation that was kind of against the trend. Now, onto the ref is an example of that. It's an idiocy. I'm in charge of the ref for my economics division. Yeah, this. And so I've been put in charge of that, and my job is to protect my people from who are, we're building a heterodox, pluralist economics group at the University of Leeds. And basically I have to defend them against the economics establishment, and believe me, that's difficult. And then meanwhile, we're actually not able either to impact, to be shown to have impact. It does strike me that it's something like the Monty Python, what not to do or how not to be seen, if you remember, in the sense that there's the use, you mentioned the biology, there's the use of a kind of medical model, the idea that just as was very well said by Robert, that somebody makes a change here in a chemical formula and the glass is passed down there and the glass is drunk and somebody is cured of a disease. That's what they have in mind. But of course, we are working with complex systems and all that where the impacts are far more vague, and it has to do with counterposing alternatives that will ramify in many complex ways that are hard to test. So I think that in part, for the next ref, we're going to try to broaden those criteria so we can defend ourselves more profoundly. And I'm sure that for the political leadership, those 200 case studies that your institution is producing and the many that mine are regarded as very irritating. And onto Brazil, just something I've observed, because as I've been a visiting scholar here, I've seen my colleagues, mostly in institutes of economics, engaged in CAPES processes. And there are different working groups, and so many times, I guess Croco's not here today, but so many times I'd be in Minas Gerais and Croco or one of the group, Fredji or somebody, would have to be absent for the day because they had to go to a CAPES meeting where there was going to be a discussion about the standards that would be used to debate who gets scholarships or which research projects are awarded. And what I understood was that they prioritized these economists who are, in some sense, more broadly thinking in a community of economists that is more broadly thinking than is true for the world as a whole. Brazil has created this ecosystem of economics that has more amplitude and more depth and range than any other in the world, and it's actually a national treasure, to be honest. And what I've seen with my colleagues is that when there was CAPES meetings, they would go there and prioritize that because it was important to be at the table, and like the votes might be like 3-3, and that's okay. It's a conversation where there's power on both sides, or all the sides. The voices are there, and the voices are in debate, and those debates are really fundamental and very important to maintain this diversity of voices that, in a sense, permits ANA to have the space to bring people here who can connect with members of their communities. This is, and I'm not being overly dramatic. With Prabhat, we could talk about India and what's happened to heterodox economics there. We could talk about other cases, but this is a globally unique situation, and I think deserves to be preserved as such. Thank you very much.
Just one moment. Benjamin, could you talk about les économistes atterrés? Because I think this is very much the matter.
I'm sorry because I'm ill, and this is the reason why I was not here this morning and yesterday. Okay, but about the appalled economists, this is an interesting experience. Appalled economist. This is a name we choose. It was born some 2 years ago, a little bit than 2 years ago, with the Greece problem in France in the beginning, and now it's spreading in Europe. What was the idea behind? The idea behind was that, first of all, let me tell you that we wrote a manifesto. It's available in English with 10 false evidence. Financial markets are efficient and all that, 10 propositions. And it was incredibly successful. We sold 18,000 copies, whilst the manifesto was available on the net. So in spite of that, we sold 80,000 copies. Then we wrote 3 books after, in 2 years, collectively. What is the idea behind? And I'll be brief. The idea is the following. We thought, as economists, and the manifesto was signed by more than 4,000 economists in France. Yeah, it was an enormous success. It's a success. Much more than we expect. Much more than we expected. The idea behind is very simple. We thought that after the explosion crisis of the financial system, 2007, 2001, and 2009, it was the end of the neoliberalism era, and that this meant that we could pass to serious things. Speak about growth, speak about equality, speak about welfare, speak about rebuilding a serious economy. And we were appalled because with the Greek case, we saw, on the contrary, let's say the neoliberal wind taking the case of Greece to reverse the verdict and say the crisis is a crisis of the welfare state. Just the people spent too much and went to live above their possibilities. And that is the reason of the crisis. And especially in Europe, they took the control on budget spending, were able to introduce an incredible austerity trend with cuts on the welfare states, cuts on the wages of the fonctionnaire. How do you say fonctionnaire? Civil servant, cuts on public health systems, and so on. So we declared we were appalled, because this is not the crisis is about. The crisis is about financial follies. In the case of Ireland, just to take this example, $65 billion of private debts, interbank debts, were converted into public debt. And this is what happens in all the countries. And the crisis is because we were too laxist in our welfare states. This is just incredible. In the case of Ireland, the public foreign debt passed from 30% to 120 and now to 180 because of this transformation of private interbank debts into public ones. And this is why we are very successful and to a certain extent influential. That is my point. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I think we are at the end of this very nice, very exciting section. I learned a lot. Thank you very much for all of you that gave me the opportunity to hear some nice ideas and some proposals that can be work for us in Brazil. So I remain my ask to you. Why don't you make a group for study our mangroves? Yes, Thank you very much. You have a lunch downstairs, isn't it?